Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Is Dillian White being treated unfairly by the sanctioning bodies? It's a question that sort of raised its head again after Dillian White was overlooked for the WBO mandatory position. That has gone to Alexander Usyk, the cruiserweight king, who has claimed it via his super champion status at cruiserweight. So he cleaned up the cruiserweight division, was declared the super champion. He was able to claim the heavyweight mandatory spot automatically, and he has done so now. That has been confirmed. Dillian White, the number one contender, misses out. And Dillian White is also the number one contender in another sanctioning body, the WBC. There's been a situation where he's been chasing down the mandatory position in that sanctioning body for a while too. So what is the actual sort of facts of the matter? Is Dillian White hard done by here? And some of that will be subjective, but I thought, let's work through some of the actual facts of the matter dating back to 2016 and make your mind up for yourself. And I'll drop a couple of comments at the end, but what I wanted to do was just work through some of what we do actually know and some of the opportunities that Dillian White has had as well, because it's not that the sanctioning bodies have only just sort of ignored White. There has been some opportunities that haven't been taken. So with that in mind, let's actually crack into it. Buckle in. Let's go. So Dillian White, he took his first career loss back end of 2015. He rebounds in 2016, wins against Ivica Bikurin, Dave Allen and Ian Lewison, pretty low-level sort of domestic opposition. And then he takes a step up against Derek Chisora at the back end of 2016. It ended up being a Fight of the Year candidate. It was a split decision win for White, a somewhat controversial result. A lot of fans thought Derek Chisora had done enough to win, but you can't take away, it was a great fight, and it could have gone either way, but there was a vein of thinking that Derek Chisora had won that from some fans. 2017, he beats Malcolm Tan and later Robert Helenius. It was in this Helenius fight that White picked up the WBC silver title. At the end of November 2017, just weeks after Bermane Stiverne loses to Deontay Wilder, Dillian White is elevated to the number one spot in the WBC rankings. Rankings update, he's now the number one. And in regards to some of the backstory with at that point, he was number one. But Dominic Breazeale, months later, confirmed as the mandatory challenger. But some of that dates back to pre-Dillian White being the number one. Dominic Breazeale fought Eric Molina on the Wilder and Stiverne undercard on November 4th, 2017. It was ultimately deemed a final eliminator. It was kept that way because Breazeale, he had originally been due to face Bermane Stiverne. The mandatory position was going to be on the line. Stiverne held it. Breazeale wanted it. They were going to fight for it. But ultimately, Stiverne elevated to the main fight. Breazeale, with a contract that said he was fighting for a mandatory position, the WBC ends up honouring that, keeping the Molina eliminator as a final eliminator, and that's why Dominic Breazeale was the mandatory challenger. But in March 2018, Dillian White faces Lucas Browne in what was largely seen as a 50-50 fight on paper. This grudge match, which was sort of made more spiteful through the joys of social media, it ends up being a one-sided mismatch. Lucas Browne showing he was a shot fighter, ultimately knocked out in brutal fashion after taking punishment over several rounds. A decent-looking performance by Dillian White. In April of 2018, the IBF orders Dillian White to face Kubrat Pulev in a final eliminator. In that same month, the WBC orders White to face Luis Ortiz in an eliminator for the so-called second mandatory position. Ortiz had been beaten the previous month by Deontay Wilder. In May 2018, White's promoter Eddie Hearn loses a purse bid for the Pulev fight, significantly outbid by a surprise bidder, Epic Sports and Entertainment. It bid $1.5 million, significantly more than Eddie Hearn had bid. He'd bid $830,000, and the then promoter for Pulev, Sauerland, had bid $800,000. Very close bidding. Hearn was in front of them, but outbid by a surprise bidder. And White, of that $1.5 million, would have got roughly 25%, $375,000, and he would have had to travel to Bulgaria for the final eliminator. Ultimately, he said thanks, but no thanks. And opting not to take the Pulev fight, and opting not to take the Ortiz fight, it was confirmed in June 2018 that White will face former WBO champion Joseph Parker in a pay-per-view event at the O2 in London. Parker coming into that fight of a loss to Anthony Joshua, but he finished that fight on his feet, the first man to do so against Joshua. Both White and Parker were expected to take home 7-figure paydays in a 50-50 sort of deal arranged in 48 hours according to their respective promoters. And at the time of that Parker fight, White was the WBC number 1 and he was the number 2 in the WBO behind Alexander Povetkin. And given White's high ranking in the WBO and Parker being at number 6, their promoters Eddie Hearn and David Higgins, respectively, they dubbed it the People's Eliminator, Parker versus White, and they would be seeking for the fight to carry some sort of eliminator status or for it to be for an interim belt, an interim title. But the WBO rejects this, saying publicly, "Please be advised the WBO does not sanction interim championships except under extraordinary circumstances which currently are not present in the heavyweight division." However, later on, the vacant WBO international belt, it is put on the line. White, he beats Parker, surviving a final round onslaught in a fight that White had a lot of success in, but it also included an accidental head clash which dropped Parker in the second round, and Parker and his management would later claim that it changed the course of the fight. Parker, it would be noted, was dropped in the 9th round of that fight as well. It was a legitimate knockdown by a vicious left hook, but Dillian White fought his fight, fought well, got the win. October 2018, Dillian White climbs to number 1 rated contender in the latest rankings update by the WBO. Later in 2018, it's confirmed Dillian White will headline a card on December the 22nd. 3 possible names are floated as being in contention by promoter Eddie Hearn: Luis Ortiz, Dominic Breazeale, and Derek Chisora. Hardcore boxing fans and polls, including done by myself, have Luis Ortiz as a preferred fight for Dillian White. But Eddie Hearn, he says the public wants the Chisora rematch, and that is the option that they would pursue as their first option. And during this time, both Dominic Breazeale and Luis Ortiz publicly welcomed the opportunity to fight Dillian White if the deal was right. The Chisora fight, it's ultimately made, and White down on 2 of the scorecards. He wins it late, another eye-catching knockout in the 11th round. Early 2019, White becomes a serious option for an April 13th fight with Anthony Joshua, but ultimately he turns it down, not happy with certain details, including how much Joshua would make in a rematch if White won the first fight. And White is later confirmed to face another top contender in the form of Oscar Rivas, who was coming off a career-best win in January 2019 against Bryant Jennings. That fight is for July 20. At the time of this video, Dillian White has been number 1 contender in the WBC for approximately 20 months. That's about 600 days. And in the WBO, he's been the number 1 contender for 9 months. He is not the mandatory challenger in either. So what do we make of the facts of the matter? I think there's a couple of things, for White and also against. It's clear he's faced very good competition in the context of the heavyweight division, which is generally a lot of stay-busy-nothing type fights. Names like Derek Chisora, Robert Helenius, Lucas Brown, even though we didn't know at the time he was shot, that was considered a decent fight at the time. Joseph Parker, and also, again, Derek Chisora a second time, and now he's stepping into another good fight with Oscar Rivas. So it's fair to say White has faced some of the best competition in the heavyweight division, or in terms of fighters who are fighting in meaningful fights. He's had a few good ones, compared to a lot of other fighters who haven't had too many to really sort of, write home about. So White has, it's undoubtedly faced some good competition. But on the other hand, he's also had opportunities. He had the Ortiz eliminator for the so-called second mandatory. He turned down a Kubrat Pulev final eliminator in Bulgaria. He could have potentially fought Breazeale instead of Chisora to take the WBC mandatory status, could have overpaid to get that. And it was possible, it was there. And we know he had a shot at Anthony Joshua. He was made offers, but he ultimately declined them. So there has been some very deliberate moves by White and his promoter Eddie Hearn. Has he really been chasing the titles? Because there has been some opportunities there. They've been talking a big game, a good game in public. They've managed to sway public perception to some extent that he's not getting the opportunities that he deserves. But there has been opportunities he's been offered, and other ones he's been gifted on a plate, like the Anthony Joshua title fight. And from the outside looking in, it seems most of it's being done for money, because he's now being put on pay-per-view in the United Kingdom. Think the Joseph Parker pay-per-view, think the Derek Chisora rematch pay-per-view, think the Oscar Rivas pay-per-view. It's about money. And is there really much on the line for any of those fights, the two that were held already and the Rivas one? Not much really, except a very good payday. Good fights for a good payday, but does it really get White closer to a title shot? Not really, but I guess in the position he's in, he's been offered a title shot recently, so it's not like he hasn't had opportunities. It's not like he couldn't have taken them, but as he says, he knows his worth in the heavyweight division, and he's determined to get what he believes is fair and a good price for his services. And, I can't begrudge him that, but at the same time, I can't have a whole bunch of sympathy for him turning down all sorts of other opportunities that could have guaranteed him a title fight. The Kubrat Pulev one being, a case in point there. Anyway, what do you make of it? You don't have to agree with me. I'm not telling you to. I've just presented the facts as they were. You can make your own mind up. If you think White's hard done by, well, more power to you. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.